we're going to wind up with the last speaker, which is myself. This is going to be a very personal couple of minutes here for those of you that don't know, and many of you do. I went through the process over the past year and actually went through it a few weeks back, and I have been successfully able to donate a kidney. My surgery was on January 13th. And here I am 3 weeks later in great shape. Thank you. And many of you have read the email newsletters or heard me talk about it in person. I'm not shy about it. I think this is something that should probably be spoken about more and not be such a big mystery. So I want to spend a few minutes just talking about the process and what it was like. So it's first a couple of facts. Today, there are over 106,000 Americans on a waiting list for an organ transplant. And just in last year, 2020, only 39,000 transplants were performed. So as you can see, the need far outweighs the supply, right? And as we sit here, even today, 17 people will die waiting on that transplant list. And it's just a very scary thing to think about, you know, that you're sitting there waiting and hoping and praying, and for many people every day it never comes to pass. So as you look at the various types of donations that are needed, to the far left and with the highest number are kidney donors. There are today almost 90,000 recipients on the donor list, or the recipient waiting list for a kidney. By far outdoes the numbers for heart and liver and lung combined by several factors. And there's less than 20,000 available donors. So again, for every 4 people waiting, there's only 1 available today. And when I see these numbers and I see this scarcity, and to be honest with you, I didn't want to make this political, even though I am in charge of a political party and we're here for a political meeting. I didn't think this was going to be a political topic. I thought this was a no-brainer, but damn it, in the last 2 weeks, even the topic of kidney donation became a political battlefield. Unbelievable. You saw that here in South Carolina, there was a patient who was on the kidney waiting list who went out of his way and blasted in the media saying, "I would rather die free than be required to get a COVID vaccine and pass medical, the medical checklist in order to be in this program." Now, let me tell you from personal experience, there's a lot of check boxes you have to meet in order to go through this program. It's supply and demand. 4 recipients for every 1 donor. The doctors unfortunately have to choose who gets it. And they're going to choose those who have the highest chance of success. If kidneys were growing on trees, or they could be grown in labs and there was plenty for everybody, sure, everybody gets a kidney, no problem. But when it could go to 2 people and 1 person has checked all the boxes for their personal safety, and in fact they're going to be immunocompromised for months because they have to be on this immunosuppressant drugs to prevent organ rejection, where catching COVID could be a death sentence to that individual who is not vaccinated. It's not a guarantee that if you're vaccinated you don't get COVID. We all know that, and it's no guarantee that you live, but the numbers are clear that your chance for survival is many times greater if you're vaccinated. So when our Congressman Jeff Duncan, who knows better with his advanced medical degrees and his experience in the field, and says he will not stand for the tyranny of the medical community and force things like vaccinations, it just made me see red. It's no different than the educators who see the legislators butting in on their business saying the same thing, who have never stepped in a classroom and think they know better. So it became a political hot button for me, and I lost an entire day of productivity as a keyboard warrior on Facebook and Twitter, and getting a lot of hate and feedback as well, but that's okay, I'm used to that. But you would just think that something like this would not become a political hot button. But I'm going to get past that and just talk about my decision process. So I was this was first brought to my attention January of last year. And I was on a road trip with my mother up in the Northeast. Both my daughter and son were graduating. My son was graduating college. My daughter was graduating nursing school. And they both live in Albany, New York. So I picked up my mother in New Jersey. We went on a road trip. And she started telling me this tale of this aunt that I did not know was my aunt. So apparently I have an uncle and an aunt that I knew and grew up with, my mother's brother and sister, but my mother apparently had yet another sister. She had a half-sister that even her half-sister wasn't aware she was a half-sister. There was a family secret from back in the 50s where my grandmother gave birth to a child and gave it up for adoption to her brother and his wife, who had tried for children and couldn't conceive. And so they took this child in as their own, and she was raised up until very recently to think that was her biological mother and father, and that she and my mother were just first cousins. And no, it turned out it was my mother's half-sister. And so my mother's half-sister, my aunt, experienced renal kidney failure a year and a half ago. And around that same time, her mother was battling Alzheimer's, and then she had passed, but before she passed, she dropped in some Alzheimer's a type of mode, let it drop that she was adopted, and refused to answer any further questions about it. And the story gets more complicated. I literally can go on through next week talking about 23andMe, talking about how my sister and my aunt connected on 23andMe by accident, how the secrets got revealed. It was a drama worthy of something that would be on the Hallmark Channel. So during this trip, I tried not to drive off the road in disbelief. But my mother is a doctor. She's a retired doctor of osteopathic medicine. She knows all of her children's blood types. She knew of her half-sister's situation with her kidneys failing and the fact that she was on dialysis and did not have long. And she knew that my blood type and her blood type were at least a match. And that's just the first baby step towards determining whether you're a match for kidney donation. So my mother did a great job by issuing no pressure whatsoever, laying down the facts, laying down the procedures. He says, if you want to consider it, I'm here to answer your questions, but we're going to make no promises, and nobody will think anything of you if you say yes or no. So I did the research. I'm a very scientific-oriented individual, and I saw, as you can see up here on the screen, to be a kidney donor is a very low-risk process, because the medical community has instituted such high standards. My surgeon at Augusta Transplant Center told me that even his center is higher than most of the centers across the nation in terms of the bar you have to reach in order to be considered a kidney donor. So we're talking 0.1% of any type of risk, 1 out of 10,000 potentially fatal due to the transplant. Those were very insignificant odds to the various activities that we perform every day. So it was low risk. And in fact, there's a lot of benefits that came out of it. Number one, I went through more medical tests. You would have thought that I was going to fly the space shuttle with all the tests they gave me. I went through stress tests with the cardio system. I went through neutron imaging, where they took 3D images of my body, top to bottom, rotate me left and right. It was really weird to see it. More blood than was dumped on Carrie in that movie from the 70s. They took everything from me, and you know what? That was good. That was all free medical testing that goes into my record that I normally would have had to pay out of pocket for. No cost to me. For any of this. They covered travel expenses. They covered all the medical expenses. Even if I had to lose work, which I fortunately missed only 3 days of work, they would have covered it. It was wonderful. And then the other thing is that now being down to one kidney, I am prioritized. Should this bad boy fail down the road, I'm already at the top of the list. So I thought that was great. But what really helped push me over the edge was talking with our third vice chair, Councilman Matthew Miller. And I know he's not here today, but I want to give him a shout out. He is walking around with one kidney today. He had a failed kidney of his own that had to be removed a few years back. So he went through the process, and he told me that, setting aside the surgery and all that, he would have no idea today that he's walking around with one kidney. He is prevented from doing nothing physically that he normally would have done. He does a little bit of running, a little bit of fitness. He does a little bit of, drinking, let's say a glass of wine here or there. Nothing, you can't go partying. But then I'm 50. I couldn't go partying anyway. Those days are long behind me. But otherwise, he said, really no difference. And a few other people that I've spoken to since that I was surprised to find. Leaders in our community are running around with just one kidney and doing really well. So that gave me the confidence to say that it's a few weeks of inconvenience for me. I would not say that the medical procedure was a non-event. It was a major medical procedure. I had 4 cuts in my abdomen. I was a miserable son of a gun for a couple of days in the hospital, but as you can see, the recovery went very well. So would I do it again? Absolutely. Now, I'm not here to pressure anybody here to do anything similar, but talk to your friends and neighbors. If the topic happens to come up a couple of years from now, you go, wait a minute, I know a guy who went through that. You can give them my number. I'll talk to anybody, anywhere about this process. And I want to leave you with this because there's a very human element here. Those of you who reached out and sent notes of kindness and asked about my well-being, without fail, all of you also asked about my aunt's well-being. And she's doing fine, but I think I would like to do one better. Would you believe it or not, I have never met my aunt in person. Maybe not since I was 2 or 3 years old, back when there used to be family gatherings up in the Philadelphia area. But otherwise, we've never spoken. We don't know each other. And last night was the first time that we actually got to speak. We did a little Zoom call to kind of hear each other's words and talk about the whole thing. And if you don't mind, I'd like to spend 4 minutes and share a bit of that conversation with you. If that's all right?
We couldn't get her tested, and then finally, when Quest opened up, I took her down to get her blood work, and she got her blood work, and the first thing that happened was the doctor said, your creatinine levels are through the roof. You have renal failure. Get to the emergency room.
Yeah, I was end stage.
Wow. End stage.
I was in the hospital. They said you have end stage renal disease, stage 5, and I had 2 days to 2 weeks to live.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
And that was Thanksgiving. By
This was
December
Thanksgiving of 2020?
2020.
2020.
Okay.
I took her to the emergency room.
So I was in the hospital and they said, you need dialysis. And I had been a critical care nurse and a heart transplant nurse. And I said, no, I do not.
Well, explain to me. To this day, I still don't know what dialysis does. What's it like? I know
Oh
what
my
it's
God.
for, but what
Right.
is it like for somebody who's never had to go through with it?
Well, first of all, I refused for almost 2 weeks. And my nephrologist would call me every day at 9 o'clock and say, where do we stand? And I would say no. And he'd say, okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And every day he would call. And we had friends here that were going to go get a kitten. And I said, oh, can I go? I want to pet a kitten before I die. I had already gone and redid my will. I basically I think it was just, I was so sick and I felt so bad that I was ready. Do you know what I mean? And I had been sick for quite a while. And like I said, I was bedridden. Brian had to help me to the bathroom. Now, this tells you how the toxins kind of played with my head. I basically feel like I had the mentality of like a 5-year-old by that point. Okay.
Before I bring her on, how are you feeling now? What's the difference between how you sit today
Oh my God.
versus where you were a month ago?
I can sit up on a sofa.
Big difference.
I know that sounds weird. I could not have done that before. I took a shower today and myself, I used to have to use a shower chair and Brian would have to stay there because when I stood up to rinse, he had to hold me up. I couldn't stand on my own. I was in a wheelchair if we went out anywhere. If we went to the store, I had to use the scooters at the grocery stores or anything. I tired so easily. I couldn't walk 10 feet without stopping and gasping for breath.
Yeah.
Well, I
It was
understand
horrible.
you signed up for a marathon in a couple
Yes,
months.
that's what
Is that
Brian
right?
keeps saying. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what
she
Brian
is.
keeps saying.
Yep.
I can actually talk without getting short of breath. But I mean, it's the simple things that you don't think about, like here, sitting on a sofa and being able to talk and not being short of breath, being able to shower, such a silly thing, but to be able to do it without sitting in a chair and having somebody there to catch you if you fall, I mean, it's the little things. I haven't been out of my bedroom for almost a year and a half. Now I can get up, I can go in the kitchen, I can get myself something to eat or something to drink. And I couldn't do that before. Everything was, Brian, can you get me? And now I can do for myself. I couldn't even stand up to brush my own teeth before. I couldn't stand that long. Bill, you have no idea. You have absolutely no clue. Because I can't even, there's nothing that I could ever do to thank you.
Well, you do have 50 birthdays to catch up on, so I'm going to hold you to that.
That's absolutely.
And we are certainly going to meet this summer for sure.
Well, thank you very much for that. And it takes community. I couldn't have done it without my mother. I couldn't have done it without my wife, who was by my side this whole time. She spent 5 days in the hospital with me while I recovered, where she couldn't see her own kids during that time. I couldn't have done it without the community support, without you guys checking in and filling in some spots and offering words of encouragement. It really does. It's a group effort. And my Aunt Karen will never know any of you, but I've certainly put in a good word for you as well. So with that, I'm going to call this to a close because I know we're out of time today, but if you have any questions, I'll be around.